Hello YouTube, I'm Rue and I'd like to welcome you back to my channel, Rue with the Books. This is a special video for me as it's my first time making a top 10 video on this channel. This is exciting because since it is my list, a year or two or however many years away, I can make a new list, look back on this one and see what I've read or what else has creeped up on this list, what else I've heard of, what else is popular and exciting at the time. Yeah. So the wonderful thing about books is that authors just can't stop writing them. So there's more content than anyone could ever consume within one lifetime. So this list is a curated set of books and series that I've heard absolutely brilliant things about, and so they've ended up on my fantasy TBR. These are the top 10 fantasy series that I need to read, and maybe you should too. If you like books, especially fantasy books, be sure to like this video and subscribe to my channel. It would mean the absolute world to me. There is bound to be an absolute trove of fantasy content eventually on my channel that I discuss, and I do talk about non-fantasy books sometimes too. So, like any good top 10 list, I'm going to begin with my honorable mentions. My honorable mentions are fantasy series that are either absolute icons of the genre, from both the past and the present. So first up is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. I know, shame on me for not having read it. It's one of those things where I keep putting it off because there are other newer series that I'm just drawn to reading more at the time whenever I think about what I'd like to read next. Because so many series kind of like pull bits and pieces, features, races, tropes from Lord of the Rings, it's almost like across everything that I've read aspects of Lord of the Rings already. Obviously, I should read the absolute master of all these features, tropes, etc. eventually, so I do plan on it. So yeah, one day I will get to it, and it's here on my honorable mentions for the time being. Next up, I have Malazan. The next, so despite being kind of in like the fantasy homework category, the reason this book is in the honorable mentions and not the top 10 is that I just don't think I have the required reading really to tackle this beast yet. I have heard that the world building is so deep and intricate that to be able to keep up with everything and get the most out of the experience, you pretty much need to have an entire book of notes. I'm not quite ready for that yet, and I think I need some fantasy training before I get to that level. So it's not in my top 10 yet, but one day it certainly will be, and hopefully when it is, it's at a time when I'm more prepared to enjoy it. My final honorable mention is Red Rising by Piers Brown. The reason that it's in my honorable mentions is that actually I have kind of already started reading this series. However, I made the regrettable decision to listen to it via audiobook. You know, people make mistakes and learn from them, and the lesson I learned is that audiobooks basically aren't for me. The words just go in one ear and straight out the other. Because, well, and the thing is I mostly listen to audiobooks when I do other things, so listening to the audiobook is not really the priority, and I find it very difficult to set aside time and just listen to an audiobook while doing absolutely nothing else. So unfortunately, despite already having put like 40 hours plus into the Red Rising series, I'm going to want to start again and read from the beginning. I don't have the motivation for that right now, but one day I shall. And now that I've gotten through my honorable mentions, without further ado, here are the top 10 fantasy series that I'm looking forward to reading in reverse order. So, to kick off this list, at number 10, I have The Great Coat by Sebastian de Castell. Genuinely, this bloke is one of my favorite authors. I discovered him through the Malevolent Seven a good while ago, and shout out to that series because the second book is out now. The first book is absolutely excellent. It has kind of like this grim, dark vibe where the main characters were all douchebags. I liked that book enough and decided to pick up the Spellslinger series, which I loved a lot, and it's probably my current favorite young adult fantasy series. I absolutely flew through it, and I couldn't stop because I just was so excited to keep reading the next book and the next book and so on and so forth. The reason it's at number 10 is because I don't think it has as much significance and as an ambitious scale or scope within the fantasy genre to beat out anything else within the top 10. This is the most personal pick for me just because I love Castell's other works. So what it's about is the Greatcoats follows Falcio. He's kind of like the lead honcho of the Greatcoats. I think there are multiple POVs in this book, but I'm not 100% certain. And so the Greatcoats are like a group that upheld the king's law until the dukes of the kingdom led an uprising that led to the king's head being put on a spike. You know, very fancy. Um, they're kind of like, so the Greatcoats are kind of like fancy policemen, although maybe a bit more of a serious bunch than the City Watch in the Discworld novels. So after the king's death, they kind of became renegades and split up, going to their own corners of the Greatcoats worlds. And with the country on the brink of war and barbarians sniffing around, putting their little fingers where they shouldn't be, the Greatcoats have a mission to enact the late king's final wish or die trying. For this, they must band back together or watch the world burn. Sounds a bit like Suicide Squad and a bit like The Devils by Joe Abercrombie, actually, but this is older than The Devils. This series seems like it could be kind of like in between the full grim dark nature of Malevolent 7 and Malevolent 8 and the slightly lower stakes young adult adventures of Spellslinger. Having enjoyed both of those, I think that being somewhere in the middle is something that I would enjoy and also get the best of both worlds. I've heard that this series is kind of like a Three Musketeers vibe. And I've not read the Three Musketeers, but this could give me an idea of whether I would enjoy it. Castell always writes brilliant action scenes, so I look forward to seeing what a group of characters written by him, with a wildly different set of skills to those in his other series, could do, how the action would flow, what kind of powers they have. Very, very exciting. I don't know much about the characters, so super duper excited to learn about them, and live the Greatcoats world through them. Castell's dialogue is always really, really great and well written, and so that's another benefit. I'm kind of somewhere in the middle of character focused and plot focused, so I think Castell is too. So this series kind of, I think, will be a perfect blend of what I like and where I am with that. Yeah, the dialogue he writes is really great. He's got a great frequency of jokes to keep you in a good mood and never souring things too much. At number 9, we have The Dark Tower by Stephen King. I bet not many of you thought that the second entry within this list would be a Stephen King series. He's not really well known for fantasy, even if he's written a few fantasy books, but real Stephen King fans do know how good he is at writing it. For those of you that have never heard of The Dark Tower, what The Dark Tower actually is within the universe, or at least what I know of it, is that it's kind of like the central hub or nexus kind of connecting all of Stephen King's other works, be it horror, fantasy, crime, etc., you know. So The Dark Tower is an epic, and to quote Stephen King's website, it is an epic of Arthurian proportions. It is as broad and versatile as Stephen King's writing itself, containing aspects of many different genres such as westerns, fantasy, romance, dystopian, sci-fi, and I'd assume much more. With context over, the first Dark Tower book follows Roland of Gilead, the last gunslinger who is in a quest to track down an enigmatic figure known as the Man in Black. who I believe is trying to destroy the Dark Tower. His journey forces him to encounter many larger-than-life characters, both human and not, as well as confronting ideas of good and evil on his quest. It sounds like a very grand, character-focused adventure. Having heard of this series before, it was very exciting that when I read Stephen King and Richard Osmar's Gwendy series, I encountered a very explicit reference to the Dark Tower. The artifact that the whole series is about is powerful enough to destroy the Dark Tower, and so dark forces are keen on acquiring it. The reason that, despite sounding so incredibly interesting, that it's so far down my list is that, well, first of all, I don't think it has like as much of a significance within the pure fantasy genre, because it's kind of like it's more based on the Stephen King work rather than general fantasy tropes and worlds and stuff like that. But the other reason is that there's a lot of references to Stephen King's other works within this series. Therefore, before getting to reading The Dark Tower, I think I would benefit from reading some of Stephen King's other works first before I delve into Dark Tower. I've heard the good ones to read, I think, are Salem's Lot and The Stand at a Bare Minimum, though I think I'd probably like to read some of Stephen King's other horror stuff before Dark Tower. Although I've heard it's not exactly necessary, I don't tend to reread stuff, so I'd like to go into reading the Dark Tower series in a state that allows me to enjoy it more than I would now. So far, I've only read The Shining and the Gwendy series, so I've got a bit of pre-reading to do before I get before I actually get to the Dark Tower. But I'm very, very, very excited to get my hands on it eventually. For number 8, I have The Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne. So, following his immensely popular fantasy series, The Faithful and the Fallen, John Gwynne debuted a brand new series, The Bloodsworn Saga, set in a brand new Norse-inspired world with the book The Shadow of the Gods. After a war in which the gods warred themselves to extinction, the aftershocks scourged the lands of Vigrio. Post-God War, powerful men battle for land, glory, the bones of dead gods which grant incredible power, all while powerful beasts lurk nearby, ready to attack those brave enough to search for these remains. This series is set to follow 3 characters who will, over the course of their journeys, shape this new world post the God War. I'm currently on the final book of the Faithful and the Fallen series, Wrath. I'm about 80% in. So John Gwynne is very, very talented at writing incredibly fast-paced, action-oriented epic adventures. One of my criticisms with the Faithful and the Fallen series is that there are so many characters and POVs, with a lot of the characters having very similar names, making it more difficult than necessary to follow. I've mostly overcome that issue after spending so many hours within the series, but it was tough for the first 2 books. The Bloodsworn Saga sounds like it improves on this problem by following 3 main POVs, rather than like 15, 20 of them. The reason that this series is down at number 8 and not higher is that my experience of John Gwynne's novels is they are pretty long and immensely action-packed. Finishing up with The Faithful and the Fallen, I'm kind of ready to read something else that has either less action or has a bit more flavor to the action. Faithful and the Fallen focuses mostly on the sword and shield action with minimal magic, which can get a bit stale. I don't want to say I'm completely burnt out of Sword and Shield, but I'd like to take a bit of a break from it and read some fantasy with a slight more focus on magic. However, when I am ready to pick this series up and jump back into Sword and Shield fantasy, I will definitely consider picking up this series. I've heard absolutely great things about it, and I hope that since John Gwynne has now finished the series and has a bit more experience writing, this book will improve on his previous work by improving the writing style and making it less overwhelming. Um, what I say by improving the writing style is that in the Faithful and the Fallen books, I feel like the prose is very simple, which isn't always a bad thing, but it's just a bit too simple and primitive. Where he writes that, like, he repeats actions from characters a lot, like the characters are always grunting as a response to something, um, or the characters say, "I like this person," trying to get you to like them too. I think there are more creative ways that you can kind of go about them. Gripes aside, I really do hope that this is an improvement. That the Bloodsworn Saga is an improvement. Because what I have read of the Faithful and the Fallen, I'm very, very, very close to finishing. I have enjoyed, at least after the first book. The first book was a bit slow. I think it goes from being slow to like super quick. But if you want something super quick, then it does a very good job of it. At number 7, I have the Sea Trilogy and the Sea Cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin. I've heard absolutely incredible things about this series. Apparently, Ursula K. Le Guin is one of those authors that tend to be an author's favorite author. So this means that this series theoretically should be absolutely peak fantasy. According to Goodreads, the page counts for these books in this series, unlike typical fantasy books, are pretty short, all being under about 300 pages. I think that is an accomplishment in of itself. It's kind of like the Murderbot Diaries, but for fantasy rather than sci-fi. The Goodreads description, like the book itself, is pretty short, so let me do my best to give a summary of what it's about. This series follows the greatest sorcerer in a land called Earthsea. And the character itself is called Ged, who arrogantly messes around with long held secrets and lets loose a terrible power upon the world. It's about him like mastering the magic of the worlds. It's about him taming a dragon and setting his mistake correct. Whether this mistake is letting loose the dragon or something else, I don't know, but I'm excited to find out. Um, Based on this summary, it sounds like it should be a fun ride. The Goodreads summary pretty much, I think, spoils the entire book, so I assume that the plot isn't that important, and it's much more about the character's journey, seeing the events that lead to him making this mistake, and seeing the events that lead to him fixing the mistake. Um, Ged sounds like someone who might be immensely talented, but a bit of a bumbling idiot. I love those types of characters, so it sounds like it should be sounds like it should be silly, a bit funny, all whilst being pretty epic. I haven't read that much Dragon Fantasy either, so hopefully this sets a better impression than Aragon. Other than that, I don't know too much about the series, but I hope that once I get to it, it will leave a lasting impression. So at number 6, almost halfway now, I've got the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. And yes, I did Google how to pronounce the author's name so I don't absolutely butcher the Polish. So The Witcher is an absolute titan of a series in terms of popularity and influence. If you've not heard of it, I'd be incredibly surprised, but it's a book series that has inspired a video game franchise as well as a TV show. What's even more impressive is that, as far as I know, it's the only translated fantasy series to reach anywhere near this level of popularity. I myself have played The Witcher 3 and completed it. I've watched the first season of the TV show and I've read one of the prequel short story collections. So I have a bit of a background in this series already, unlike basically the rest of the top 10 list. It primarily follows Geralt, a witcher, who at a basic level takes on jobs from people to get rid of monsters that are troubling them. What makes this series absolutely incredible is the way that Andre so creatively comes up with these different monsters, being inspired by fairy tales, folklore, and I guess in some sense also The Lord of the Rings. And he gives like unique twists to these beasts. The monsters are rarely what they seem at first sight. Some are kind, some are brutal, some are even funny. They all have their own lives and motivations, and Geralt takes all of these factors into account when coming up with a solution at the task at hand, allowing him to obtain his coin. Um, it doesn't always have to end in violence, so sometimes the monsters are almost as human as humans themselves, and at least it does sometimes lead to some beautiful moments and interactions. Apart from the monsters, there are also other factions and parties at play. Across several countries, there are different kings, queens, witches, and even more different factions who all want different things and play their own politics. This means that the world is living and breathing. I'm incredibly excited to properly start this series with the actual first book, that isn't a collection of short stories, and to start experiencing the world, the characters, the power dynamics, the plots, and see what a Witcher can really truly do. At number 5, I have The Gentleman Bastards by Scott Lynch. So, the Gentleman Bastard series begins with the incredibly popular and exciting The Lies of Locke Lamora. Despite not having read it, I can pretty confidently say that the first entry to this series, according to fantasy fans, is the single greatest heist novel ever written. This series is in the category of books that is so commercially successful that the author doesn't even need to bother continuing to write it, leaving fans desperately hungry for more. As far as I'm aware, you can quite happily treat The Lies of Locke Lamora as a standalone book and be done there if you got your fill. I just want to say that I think the title itself flows so well when you say it and sounds so beautiful. The Lies of Locke Lamora. The Lies of Locke Lamora. You get it. The book follows the guy named in the title, Locke Lamora. After being a baby and then also being part of a family, his life truly starts with all that struggle and strife nonsense as an orphan after his parents are killed. Under the mentorship of a gifted con artist, he is able to get by and even learns how to do more than that. Eventually, he begins to lead a band of thieves known as the Gentleman Bastards. He becomes infamous within the underworld by performing an incredibly ingenious con, fooling someone incredibly powerful. But lurking in the shadows is someone even more ambitious and deadly. Locke Lamora ends up locked in a deadly chess game, where failing to outmaneuver his opponent could mean the lives of those closest to him. This book is a bit of a chunker with over 700 pages, but it does sound like the kind of book that is just an absolute page turner and you're just glued to the pages 100% of the time, just struggling to put the book down. There is bound to be intrigue, danger, high stakes, witty banter, camaraderie between the bastards, and a whole lot more. Being this far up the list, I think it is a book that I could get around to reading in 2026 or earlier. While I may not invest time in the whole series, considering it's probably never going to get finished, I will definitely read the first book. Do let me know down in the comments below if you've read the other books and if you thought they were any good, and if you think that it's worth reading the other books. At number 4, I have The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. So yeah, number 4, we have an absolute behemoth of a fantasy series. This series has a whopping 14 books, 147 unique POVs, and even an app that you can use called the Wheel of Time Compendium to remember who did what, because the series is just so long and intricate. Unfortunately, the author Robert Jordan passed away in 2007, having not finished his series, but he left the fate of it in Brandon Sanderson's hands, who, as far as I know, wrote the intended ending and did a good job to the fan service. In a bid to find out if this series would be up my alley, I have watched the first season of the Wheel of Time show, and I liked the general vibe of it. And therefore, I knew that if I got to reading this series, that I would enjoy it. Um, the Wheel of Time is an epic fantasy series with immensely deep world building. It follows a large cast of characters, most of whom have their own unique powers, and it is mainly about a battle between good and evil. The Chosen One, known as the Dragon Reborn, is the one that is responsible to battle against the Dark One. There are also factions with their own power struggles, terrifying ancient powers, lurking secrets, politics, religious orders, etc., and even more. There is so much to sink your teeth into with this series. As I mentioned, there's 14 books. The Wheel of Time is a story about camaraderie, friendship, as well as the passage of time and the cyclical nature of it. Um, I'm very interested to find out if this series follows just one cycle or if there are multiple cycles that happen that do eventually lead to it being broken within the span of just the 14 books. With the series being so long, I'm very excited to see how the characters grow over time in terms of their intelligence, wisdom, experiences, and how their power and abilities grow. um, with so much time that you have to commit to these characters, I'm sure that I'll get to absolutely love a load of them. And based on the TV show, there's a few that I like already. Um, as far as the first season of the TV show went, we didn't get to see that much of what the Dragon Reborn's powers are. So I am also very curious as to what he's going to be able to, as to what they are going to be able to do. Have you read The Wheel of Time? Is it in your top 10? Let me know. How exciting! We are finally in the top 3. So you might be wondering, what's at number 3? Well, it is The Age of Madness by Joe Abercrombie. I really, really enjoyed the original First Law trilogy. I do have about 4 other First Law Universe books I plan to read before getting to this trilogy, because I do want to read it in publication order. Um, I have heard absolutely incredible things about this series, so I'm just so excited to get to it. Um, the First Law is quite a mysterious name for a series, and it represents the original trilogy quite well as we learn about the world, some of the important ancestors of the world that helped shape the way it currently is, as well as the magic system and its lore. As events unfold in the original trilogy, we experience firsthand the events that people in the future are going to be talking about, the legendary figures, the legendary events, and so on. The Age of Madness, as a name for a trilogy, sounds like it will mark a dramatic shift in the world, bringing upon intense chaos and a new, different era. All I really know about this series is that it follows the offspring of some of the characters in the original trilogy, and I believe that there are some characters present from the original trilogy too. I don't really want to read the summary because it might spoil things for the other preluding books that I need to read, like Burst Earth Cold, for example. Um, as a fan of Joe Abercrombie, I am excited to return to his universe to learn about more, a new cast of morally grey characters, live through some intense, well written action sequences, and laugh at his silly old sense of humor. When things get incredibly dismal in Joe's books, there are some absolutely top tier cracking jokes and brilliant banter between the characters that bring along a slightly more light-hearted nature when things get dark, and they keeps me wanting to read because I do like a bit of lightness in my fantasy. I don't like it when it's too serious and gets a bit too grim. So yeah, I'm very, very excited to get around to the Age of Madness, but there are a few books, a little bit of pre-reading I need to get done before I finally get to the Age of Madness trilogy. At number two, I have the Seere Trilogy by Robin Hobb. I just wanted to say real quick that the main character of this series has my favorite name in all of fantasy, that being Fitz Chivalry Farseer. It's just so absurd. I hope that the absurdity of this name does match the character in the series. So, this series is about Fitz, a royal bastard. He's gifted with a power called wit, the ability to communicate with animals. As a lonely child, he makes use of this magical power for companionship. However, the power is looked down upon within high society, and when he's adopted back into his own family, which is kind of a funny chain of events, he has to use his power. He has to give up the use of wit and instead embrace a new life of weaponry, scribing, courtly manners, and how to kill a man quietly. He has to train to become a royal assassin. The Goodreads summary of the first book in this series really doesn't give much away. I'm guessing that this book mainly acts as a training arc, introduces the characters, and very likely sets up the plot for the next two books in the series. Additionally, with Fitz rejoining the royal family, I assume that there is bound to be a lot of politics. A lot, all of the book titles have the word assassin in them, so that tells me about as much as the Goodreads summary does. I'm sure that there will be a lot of sneaking around, betrayal, coming up with heist-style plans to take care of targets. These targets could potentially be people planning coups, political opponents, I've heard that this trilogy is an emotional roller coaster and that Fitz really goes through a lot. I'm guessing that that surely means that there's going to be a lot of mistakes, but also um, character development, emotional as well as physical. Um, I feel that we don't get enough emotional roller coasters in fantasy. From what I've read in fantasy, the like deaths and stuff in books, they don't pack that much of an emotional punch. So with what fans of this series have said, I'm hoping that it will bring me to a new fantasy low emotionally. I'm ready for some heartbreak. Being at such a high up spot in my list, I'm quite likely to start this series pretty soon. So I shall get to experience the absolute sensation that is the Farseer trilogy sooner rather than later. I'm very desperate to start reading The Assassin's Apprentice. Um, in addition to the Farseer trilogy, this series is part of a whole collection of works within a universe called the Realm of the Elderling Saga. And if the Farseer trilogy and the Life Ship Traders is as good as everyone says they are, then I'm very, very, very excited to read other works in the series too, and get a complete, comprehensive understanding of what makes it so goddamn good. And finally, at number one, I'm sure the anticipation has been absolutely killing you, is The Cosmir by Brandon Sanderson. Yup, my number one spot is the entire Cosmere universe by Brandon Sanderson. So, the Cosmere universe is very exciting because it has many sub-series within it, with each sub-series basically having a different magic system and taking place in a different era of technology or like a different age. I've never read a story within the Cosmere yet, and I plan to start right at the beginning of Brandon Sanderson's own reading order with Mistborn Era 1. I've heard that Mistborn Era 1 is kind of like the classic medieval Europe style fantasy story. and that later Cosmir sub-series are spread out across multiple planets, ages, technologies, etc. I wanted to read the entire Cosmere because the stories being somewhat interconnected across one shared universe sounds very epic. It's like getting to read about society on Earth in 1000 AD, then reading about society on Venus in 2000 AD, then reading about society on Mars in 3000 AD, so on and so forth. You get the point. The reader, after investing so much time into the universe, kind of builds up like a fictional history about a whole model universe. The fact that Brandon Sanderson has done this and been as prolific of a writer as he has been is very impressive and motivational for me to actually get stuck in. There's also this time traveling dude who crops up between different Cosmere books. That's about all I know about him. Very excited to see his appearances. You don't have to be as dumb as me and claim you'll eventually read the entire Cosmere while simultaneously having read none. There are also standalone books that you can get into, like Tress of the Emerald Sea, if you just want a flavor of his universe and his writing style. I just mentioned a second ago that I plan to get into it with Mistborn Era 1, so I'll give a little summary of what that's about. That series is about Kelsier, someone who has awakened as a Mistborn. A tyrant ruler has controlled the world for 1,000 years, and all hope has been lost of establishing a new, better world order. But Kelsier awakening could change things. He assembles a team of the most powerful Allomancers hidden deep in the underworld that he can find, and upon chance meets Vin, someone who, with some training, could become this dream team's ultimate trump card. It's a long shot, but can this Suicide Squad pull it off and take the tyrant off his throne? This series asks the question of what happens if the Chosen One loses against evil. How does life go on with the tyrant in question? Potentially the second best heist story ever written, with obviously The Lies of Locke and Lamora being at number 1. Can our protagonists win? This series sounds like it could satiate my wants to have a bit of magic in fantasy that I'm currently craving after reading so many Faithful and the Fallen books. Yeah, it sounds like it should be exciting. I think it's maybe a bit more grim than a lot of other fantasy. Should be very exciting, with some incredibly written action sequences involving kind of the roguish nature of characters, but also having a really cool magic system that is unlike anything else in fantasy. I think Allomancy is something to do with metals. That's really all I know about that. So yeah, it should be a really, really good starting point for the Cosmere. Yeah. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching my video. This is my longest one to date, and it's required the most amount of research. I didn't have to pick out 10 books from the internet. I did know about all of these series before, and these have been on my TBR. But just finding out what these stories are about and be able to concisely enough summarize what they're about, if you get my drift. This list isn't necessarily the absolute order in which I plan to read them, but based on my idea of these series, it's kind of like a general priority list, with the ranking being where roughly I think how important it is for me to read it in my fantasy journey. Please do comment down below how many of these series you've read from my top 10, as well as your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you're currently reading as well, so chuck that in the comment section too. And until next time, Rue out.